today I am here with attorney Ruby L. Powers. She's a board certified immigration attorney and a nationality attorney. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ruby. How are you doing
Yes, of
today?
course. I'm doing great. Thank you. And thanks for everyone's patience. We got started a few minutes late, but we have a lot of great information for you. You can put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to do our best to address them as we discuss this fun topic.
Awesome, thank you so much. Y otra vez, muchas gracias a todos los que nos están acompañando el día de hoy. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre inmigración sobre empleo y unos updates que tenemos sobre nuevas cosas de empleo con visas, green cards, etcétera. Nuestra abogada les puede contestar cualquier pregunta que ustedes tengan. Y muchas gracias por estar aquí. Again, thank you guys so much. Today we're going to be here with Attorney Powers. She's been licensed since 2008. She found the firm in November 2009. So yoo-hoo, Ruby. She has ran her firm from Dubai. So this remote working is not new to her. She's kind of a pro at it by now. And as stated, she is a board certified immigrant lawyer since 2013. She is part of the Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business 2015. She's also part of AILA, Texas. Is that Oklahoma?
It's our
And
Texas chapter for the American Immigration Lawyers Association.
Yeah, so she is very active in our community, guys. She's also an author for Build and Manage Your Successful Immigration Law Practice Without Losing Your Mind. So if we have any business owners or any wannabe business owners, please feel free to check out that book. Really good information. So, and we will begin. Will you take it away, Ruby?
Sure, go ahead. Thank you, Dana, for that intro. And you know, I just want to get started with this is a sheet that we often use in our consults when we're trying to explore options. And so I'm just going to use this as a template to get started. But let me begin with the concept of there's non-immigrant visas and there's immigrant visas and statuses. And non-immigrant is when it's very temporary, you have a specific purpose, you're going to do that, you still have intentions to go back home, and it's short-term in nature. Immigrant is that you're planning to immigrate to the United States with long-term intentions to move towards a legal permanent residency and a pathway to naturalization citizenship. And a lot of times when we have conversations with those coming in for consult, we are preparing a plan that involves possibly a variety of different visas. And maybe it's a short-term solution to get us to the green card. A recent consult is how can we get the next 3 or 4 years in the U.S. being able to work while we're waiting for a sibling petition to become available that's been pending for 16 years. The other thing is that there could be a spouse that's eligible for one visa that can work or not work, and there could be someone who's eligible and they might be able to get the whole family a green card. So it is like a puzzle, and I really enjoy that when we have a consult and we get all that information. And sometimes people come and say, I want to get this visa. And I'm like, well, have you considered all these other possibilities? And we might come out saying, oh, this other one that they didn't even know existed is a good option. So this is a sheet that we created that was more of like, this is some things to consider. It's not everything, but these are some of the ones the top ones to consider. And it's a mixture of non-immigrant and immigrant, but when we're having this conversation with people. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I wanted to mostly focus on the non-immigrant visas. And so the one that most people talk about a lot is the H-1B. There's only a certain amount available every year. They're a temporary work visa for specialty occupations. And very limited circumstances can the spouse work. Generally, the H-4 is not allowed to unless there's a green card pending, a labor certificate pending for the H-1B. So a lot of times the spouse might try to get another type of visa. But usually what it is there's what we call cap and non-cap. And cap means that you had to have gone through the whole lottery registration system. And non-cap means that you didn't have to. And those are certain situations with profit and education in certain hospital type of scenarios. So that's one of the first things we ask, because when you're in a cap situation or you go through the registration, the start starts with October 1st, the beginning of the year of the what's that called, the fiscal year for the government.
Yeah.
And so it seems crazy because you apply. This is the first year we did a registration. So in the past, it was you had to file by April 1st, be in the lottery. If you were chosen, then they still have to review you to get started for October 1st. But this year, you put your hat in the ring on a registration, and then if they chose you, then you could submit the rest of the application. That saved a lot of people money, because if they weren't going to be chosen, they didn't have to put the whole package together. It was the first year, so there were some kinks in it. We had really a high success rate this year, so we were very happy with that. And so anyway, H-1Bs are the one a lot of people think about. And what's great about them is that you can have them for 6 years, and you can continue to actually extend them if you have a labor certification pending, waiting for visa availability. And so really a lot of people, maybe they come in on a student visa, get the OPT or CPT, and then later move to an H-1B and then get a green card. So it's a success, but there's been a lot of changes, and this administration has been having issues with it and trying to make changes to it. So the national interest waiver, I'll talk a little bit more in the immigrant options. So let's move over to E2. The E2 is one that we see a lot of, and this is where someone comes to the United States, so they have to be on the list of the treaty of countries. For example, a lot of parts of Europe are on that list. Mexico, Pakistan is on the list, but not India. And generally what you would do is you either can buy a prior existing enterprise or make a new one. And we've seen for professional services industry as a minimum of maybe $30,000 to $40,000 investment. But you have to show that you have enough funds to be able to survive even when you're not making money in the beginning with the business. You need to have usually a 5-year plan. The beauty of the E2 is that a couple things to mind. The spouse can work, and that is a great thing. And the other thing that's great is that we've had some people have it for 10 or 15 years, even though it's a non-immigrant visa. The other thing to consider is, though, you have to look at the reciprocity with the countries. So with Mexico, we have a 1-year reciprocity, which means that a Mexican E2 visa holder would have to renew it every year. So in many cases, it can be a great option, and in some cases it might be a little bit limited, but you must still show that you don't have immigrant intent and you intend to return. I'm going to skip over EB5 for a second, go over to the L, which we have a slide for. This is one we see a lot of, which is the temporary worker, either as an L1A or an L1B, and we'll go into that in more detail. The beautiful thing about the L, the general thing to remember is that you had 1 year, you work for that company 1 year in the last 3 years abroad, and then you're going to be needed here in the United States. The spouse can work on the L2, and if it's an L1A, you can have it for 7 years. If it's an L1B, it's for 5. But in many cases, we can move an L1A to a green card within that period of time. The F1, though that's not an employment-based visa, it seems to be a pathway to a gateway to a more employment-based visas. Even my husband was an F1 and an OPT, and we got married and did the green card, but if we wouldn't have met, I'm sure he would have been an H1B. And so that's what the beauty of an F1 for a lot of the international students are move from there to H1s and OPT and they're able to work that way. So sometimes people might be a visa holder, an employment visa, and then move back to an F1. Like they get a bachelor's, they get an OPT to work, which can be extended for STEM careers a little bit longer than non-STEM. And they're waiting for their H-1B. They get the H-1B, and maybe if they, for some reason, they didn't get their green card, or they didn't get H-1B, they could move back to an F1 and get another OPT, which is optional practical training where they can work. They can get one OPT per grade level. So for bachelor's, for master's, and for PhD. But if you get multiple bachelor's or multiple masters, you can't get multiple OPTs. So that's why I also mentioned the F1. The O1 is for extraordinary ability. You don't have to, the O3, which is the spouse and children, cannot work. But this can be a very good option if you don't meet some of the other requirements. And the J1 is another one. J1 is sort of this funny place where it can be everything from an au pair, nanny, to used for medical professionals, to those who are temporary working in the United States in certain areas. So the one thing is you have to look to is how did you get funded, and if there's any tight restrictions, because a lot of times a J1 could potentially have a 2-year restriction that you have to return back to your home country before coming back, or there is a way to either get a no objection letter, waive it, or what have you. That can get a little complicated, but when anyone says J1, I'm like, show me your passport, your visa, show me your DS documents, and let's clarify if you have that restriction or not, because that can cause some time and delays. And we'll talk about PERM a little bit later, but that's usually what people call when you can do the labor certification process, and this is immigrant based, so we'll touch about it later. The TN visa is one that is for Canadian and Mexican nationals. It was created after NAFTA, and what's beautiful about that is there's like a list of professions, and I could say teacher, some doctor, things like that. I don't have them all memorized, but when there's the management consultant is another one, and that's sort of a catch-all for some people who are more of a consultant and have specialty knowledge that are needed. Well, the great thing about a TN is that it's a lot easier than a lot of these other visas to obtain. For Mexican nationals, it's at the consulate, embassy in Mexico, and for Canadians, it can be even at the airport on their way in, with just an offer letter and the credentials that they have. And you can have it for a short period of time. For Mexican nationals, it's for 1 year at a time you need to renew. But a person could use that visa and then move to something else. It's a non-immigrant visa, that's a reminder. An E3 is something that you might not hear about it, but Australians know about it. It's sort of like maybe a TN for an Australian in a way. It's as long as they have a certain educational requirement and they have an offer letter, they can get a visa for a short period of time and continue to renew that. So if you're Australian, you always want to be aware of the E3. And if you're from Singapore or Chile, you can consider H1B1 in certain circumstances, but it's very specific to those countries. So let's go into a little bit the L1A and L1B. Generally what we see is either a large company, a small, medium, large company needs to bring in their L1As, the manager or executive, and they definitely have to prove for both the L1A and L1B that they worked 1 year in the last 3 years in the foreign country with that company, and then that company needs to bring them here to the United States. There's some cases that if you're on a blanket L can make it a lot easier, but that's only for certain companies that have a large number of L's. Where we usually see the L's are in different situations. We see the L1A and L1B, but we also see it when people are making a new business. in the United States. So let's say they had a business in Mexico and they've been owning it for the 1 year in the last. It's similar to E2 in some respects, but you have to keep the business going in the foreign country, and you can show the need for that in the United States. And so you get a new Office L for 1 year, and then you can continue to extend it to that maximum of 7 years. So,
Okay. So quick question, Ruby.
yeah.
Here's a hypothetical. So let's say my employer, I'm an immigrant, I work in, let's say, Mexico, and my employer has a company here in the United States. He can petition for me to work for him here?
Yes. You might want to consider, so the TN comes to mind as a Mexican national. If you meet the requirements for an E2, that's a possibility, but the L seems to be the one that comes to mind, where if they have this employee has worked there 1 year in the last 3 years in the Mexican location, they have a U.S. location, or they're wanting to open the U.S. location, and but they have to prove that they need that person. So they're going to look at the job description, the company, the hierarchy. They're going to look at their resume, and sometimes everybody is a vice president, but one company it means you're in charge of like thousands of people, and another you have nobody that you manage. So they don't always look just to the titles. They really look deep into the job description, and whether you're into day-to-day or you're overseeing other people. But yeah, I'm going into a tangent, but you're right. That this is how it's like a puzzle, and you would be trying to figure that out, but there's like a few possibilities. The other thing is, someone might say, well, I have this business and I want to make another business, but we could work on making a corporate umbrella connection for them all. So we would bring in some corporate attorneys and give you some suggestions on those. So it's a possibility. The biggest thing that I see the difference between the E2 and the L1, if you're opening a business in the US, is that the L, you have to keep the business in the foreign country going and successful while you're not there. So if it really was just dependent on you, that can be very hard if you're in 2 countries at the same time. And the other thing about an L is it has dual intent, and I forgot to mention that. So I mentioned non-immigrant and immigrant intent, but there's 2 visas that have dual intent. It's the L and the H. And so what it means is it's okay if you have this L or H, but you have intent eventually to get your green card, maybe with labor certification, or some other I-140 based immigrant visa. So that's important to note, because the E2 and the TN do not have dual intent. So some people have tried to go from E2 or TN to some other immigrant visa, and it can be complicated and due to the timing of it all. I hope this makes sense. I don't know. It just sounds like it might be too complicated, but
Yeah, guys, may sound a little complicated, but that's why we urge you guys to get experienced attorneys to look over your case, because as we see Ruby's over here going on, during the consultation, the client presents a circumstance, and then she is able to better evaluate and let them know and deduct what it is that they need, and what else they can do. So you're doing just fine, Ruby.
Okay. Well, and the other thing to those watching and who watch now or later, we usually say, come in with your resume, tell us what you think you want to talk about. Well, we usually do with employment consults is have 2 parts, because it'll either they have a very specific question and either I know the answer, we need to double check it because things are constantly changing, or we might just say, these are the few visas that I think would work for you. Here's a little homework for each of these, and then let's circle back. So we do a deep dive, and we want to make sure that you have the right strategy in mind and you've considered all options, because like I said, it's not usually just a one-time thing. It's usually we're looking towards the green card and the horizon, and how do we get there? So like I mentioned about the O's, extraordinary ability, science, education, business, athletics, this is usually a very small percentage of folks, but this is a possibility. And this isn't just for like those in athletics, or this could also be in business. If you've have a patent and invented something, and we for some reason we can't get you into another visa at the time, but this can be a very great option for people who meet that requirement. So we're continuing on some of these H1 these non-immigrant visas that we talked about, and and then let's see, we covered a lot of these already.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go into and for the last of the non-immigrant visas, there's a couple other ones that you don't hear often, like P can be for the performing and for artists. There's one for those in the press. There's a lot of other specific employment ones, and there's even those who work in like NGO fields. We just don't often see them as much, but we have, and so we do explore all those possibilities. And sometimes people come to us to get a second opinion. The company they work for has their own immigration arm. Uh, or they maybe are just, they're looking for immigration help for their company or for themselves. And so we can help on all those fronts. So in terms of, we're moving more on to the immigrant side. For the most part, a lot of different non-immigrant visas are stepping stone or gateway to an immigrant visa. Um, in many cases, but they're not. But if it is a non-immigrant visa, though, you need to not have immigrant intent. Unless it's dual, it's okay. But in many cases, people hop around, I guess we could say, from those visas to eventually get an immigrant visa. And so one of them is there's the prior. If you look at the visa bulletin, you can see the different priorities. But one of them is the priority workers, and those who have extraordinary ability in the science, arts, education, business, and athletics. And if you can meet these requirements, then you can get your I-140, which is the immigrant visa petition form, approved. And depending on the visa availability, you can get your green card. The thing is, you have to be very careful that you maintain your status. When you're going to a green card process, you need to make sure that you don't have more than 180 days of unlawful presence, or you will not be able to adjust or change status without triggering a bar. For the EB1, this can be anywhere from the outstanding professors, extraordinary ability in science, arts, education, business, athletics, which we do a lot, especially in education and business, science, or it could be outstanding professors and researchers, and so this is another great area, or the multinational managers and executives. Where we see the EB13 category is potentially for those who were on the L1A and were able to move over to a green card this way. So I'm sure a lot of those of you watching know something about this, and I'm not just spewing a lot of letters and numbers. It sounds like I'm speaking gibberish, because I'm thinking from an outsider, it does sound a little bit wonky. The other thing to consider, another way, is for those in second preference who get a labor certification. And in simple terms, and we do a lot of these, and so we've had a high success rate, and usually you're looking at maybe about a 2-year process, potentially. Things are always changing, but you have to be in there for the long haul. A job offer is required. So let's just put it in simple terms. A company says so-and-so employee is great, really like them, they're doing great, I can't really find anybody else to do this, I really need them to stay in this job. So they're going to test the labor market and see if anybody else out there can meet the requirements and do that job the same way or better as that immigrant. And so you put posts in the newspapers, you post it in the company, you see what's out there, and you interview people. If you cannot find somebody that meets their qualifications, whatever that is, and it's a science, this whole thing is a science. We have very experienced help assistants on this. Then you could potentially move forward with the labor certification process to getting a green card. And once your certification is been certified, you have to wait to make sure that you're right category, that visa becomes available, and you can move forward. We have a lot of success in these areas, and we've helped a lot of people. And but you really have to know what you're doing to be successful in this. And so this can help many people, including those with professionals with holding advanced degrees or equivalent of experience, and those exceptional ability. So this is another great way people can get a green card. And generally, you don't have to be in the United States to be doing all of this. We have clients who are doing this over consular processing, but generally what I've seen is that the person would have to have a ties to the company to prove that it's easier to find a job, I think, in the United States when you're here than you're not here. But we've had cases where people had already interacted with the company, and then the company found that they couldn't find anyone to do that same job. So we'll move on. But this is the one other thing to mention is that while this is pending, it doesn't give you work authorization. So that's why I was saying you need to have another visa, ideally a dual intent visa, to be able to have the time. So a lot of people do an H-1B, for example, and have a labor certification working on in the background. So third preference is skilled workers, professionals, and unskilled workers. This sort of a large group of different skill people. So that's another possibility. Usually the wait time is a little bit longer for these than the others. It also depends on what country you're from. Fourth preference, we're looking at a lot of different types of other visas, and these are some other groups to consider. And we also have this is some more of that NGO employees, things that we were mentioning. And then EB-5 is the one where you can, if you invest in a substantial amount of money in the United States capital and can prove that you created at least 10 jobs within 2 years, you get the first visa that's good for 2 years, and you remove that condition, and then you can get your green card. And so this is the immigrant investor.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we sort of, we got some chat and questions here I need to check, but we've covered a lot of territory. And the other thing to note, okay, I'm just seeing the questions now. The other thing to note is that there's a lot of changes. So the other part of this is about trends. So when in April, at the end of April, the Trump administration made a lot of restrictions on consular processing and certain visa types. And then it was extended 2 months later to a lot more visa types that would be prevented from being able to get their visas if they, by the end of this year. So honestly, we just review things on a case-by-case basis because it's really hard to just explain that last June 22nd proclamation, because there's been a lot of rolling back. For example, it was confusing as to whether all L's were not allowed. They've clarified that like certain Canadians were exempt from that proclamation. In some cases, the other thing you have to consider is the nationality, but also which country you're coming in from, because we have certain travel bans from certain countries. So for some people, they could go to another country, let's say Canada, maybe, but maybe Canada has their own rules about letting you in, and then you might have to wait a couple of weeks to be quarantined, and then you could potentially come into the US. Now, I'm just going to say that it's very complicated. I'm not going to answer anyone's particular question about that situation. And what I would say is that you really, would need to have a consultation about that so we can verify that we're giving you the right information. But for the most part, in terms of getting these visas, some of them you can apply here in the United States. You can change from one status to another. And then some, if you're outside the country, you could apply for them and in the US, but then have to wait to go to the consulate to get your actual visa and your passport. So in some cases, with the consulate being very limited in their capability right now, we're seeing things very slow in that respect. Some of the consulates and embassies have been opening up, but there hasn't been a lot of consistency, and so we're still watching to see. Under that proclamation, it seems like they've interpreted it like they get to decide whether they want to deal with a certain visa or not, or if it meets the interest, the emergent interest waiver to not the national interest waiver, but the other waiver that was it's in the interest of the nation to let the person in and be exempt from the proclamation of the June 22nd proclamation. So I know that
It's a lot of news. It's a lot of
yeah,
news.
it's a lot of news. The one thing I would say, and there's some questions I think we might want to just answer in a consultation and on the chat, but the one thing you need to be careful about is if you go from, you could go from like a B2 to an F1, but you can't study until it becomes approved, and you also need to make sure that you bridge that F1, and what that means is you keep filing another B2 extension every 6 months, or else the F1 will get denied. And a lot of people who do this on their own find out the hard way after waiting a long time. That's what they need to do. The other thing is that if you have an immigrant visa that you're waiting for availability, if it is a short term, and you're switching around between different non-immigrant visas, that could become a reason for a non-immigrant visa to be denied. In some cases, it might be better to just leave the country if you're waiting for an immigrant visa to become available. And so those are some of the considerations that we make. The other thing that I wanted to say is that with the economy being what it is right now, we're having a lot of consults with people who might be laid off, let's just say, and they're an L or an H1 visa. What we usually would do for them is to move them to a B2 or tourist visa, and that buys them some time to be able to transition, potentially find another job, maybe sell the house, get kids out of school, move to their home country, or find another job somewhere else. But some visas have grace periods, but it's better to, as soon as if you have a feeling, a thought, concern that there might be some layoffs or redundancies made in your company, you definitely want to have a consult with an independent immigration attorney who has your best interest in mind, so that you can make sure that you are not waiting to the last minute. Because from a lot of the consults I've had, it seems like people have a feeling or know that things are coming, if that be the case. Unfortunately, I don't like having to say all of this, but I'm just trying to make it less painful, because the more immigration does not move fast, and there is such a thing as premium processing, which gives you the answer within 15 calendar days, which is going to be moved up to 15 business days. The other thing to note is that the filing fees are going to be changing on October 2nd. So
Yes.
all of the cases that we're trying to get out, we're trying to get them out before in the next week or so, because USCIS has been having a lot of issues between USPS and the USCIS. We've been seeing a lot of delays. Yeah, so I think that if you have a very specific question, feel free to give us a call at 713-589-2085 for a consultation, and we can discuss that in detail. And Dana, did you have any questions?
Let me see. I don't think I have any other questions. Again, guys, I would like to say Ruby was talking about the news and how the proclamation and how the Trump administration has been, going at it with us. Any news that we get or we need any of our clients or just anybody to know of, if you have a friend or a family member, please subscribe to our newsletter. We send it out bi-weekly and it has all the new information, anything that has been new in the news, any updates on immigration. We always post it and keep up to date with that. And again, if you guys have any questions, Ruby, as you guys can see, she's very informed. So please feel free to ask either through contact at Ruby Powers Law, send us an email to schedule you for a quick consultation to answer your immigration question that you may have in regarding to your case, because every case is very specific, as we have heard. But yeah, guys, it is very important to get legal advice from a very experienced attorney because it's a whole process, as you guys heard. So getting from one thing to another, it's better to just have that assurance that it's going to be processed, with high quality. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We do these webinars every Friday. So if you guys have any like topics that you guys want us to touch base on, please feel free to let us know. You can email us any topics or just, you guys can also comment down below
Yeah.
or IM us.
What are some of the other webinars we have coming up the rest of September and October?
So the next one that we have coming up, ladies and gents, is the one second.
And the other thing is we're going to be opening up we're going to be doing on Tuesdays at 5. We're
Yes.
going to open up for questions. We'll have a theme and it will be very interactive and have less of a educational aspect with like a webinar, but it will be educational. We'll be answering questions. So stay tuned to that. We'll be coming out with the details very soon about that. But we have everything from conditional residency, I-751, to rare alternatives for a green card, and also success with the asylum process. And, if you give us an idea, or if you want us to go a deeper dive into one of these visas, just let us know, and we'll prepare that for you, because we're doing this as a community service, and this is broadcasted live, but it's also going to be available in case anybody wants to watch it later or share it with their friends or family, loved ones, so that they can learn about this. But I think we're good for the day. Thank you so much for joining us. Call us for consults if you give us message us, email us, call us if you have any suggestions for future webinars, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us, and feel free to follow us on all of our social medias and check out our upcoming webinars. Thank you so much, Ruby, for all this information.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you guys. Bye.